Welcome to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm your host, Matt Bennett. Each episode we talk about the research and practical aspects of the trauma informed movement. This podcast is not designed to replace mental health services. If you feel uncomfortable or triggered by our discussion, please consider seeking your own trauma treatment. In no way is seeking treatment an admission of weakness. It is a chance to build resiliency and experience post-traumatic growth. You can find show notes, resources, and more at traumainformedlens.org. Welcome, friends, to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I am back with a very special guest. My friend Deb Borne is returning to the show. It took me like 2 years to get her on the first time, but it's great to have her back. And we're going to talk about, Deb, I know something that we are both passionate about, stages of change, motivational interviewing, especially contemplation. So I've been looking forward to our conversation ever since we brainstormed this topic a few weeks back. So our regular listeners will know you, but just for everybody, give you a quick introduction, a reminder of who you are and the brilliance you bring to this world.
Well, thanks, Matt. It's exciting, and you're hopefully won't get sick of me because I'm going to be here like every month. I made a promise.
Love it.
Well, right now I live in San Francisco, and like many of you, are having multi-hazard apocalyptic experiences. We had an orange sky the other day. So wherever everyone is, I'm sending everyone as much strength and compassion and resiliency, because it's been very strange times. And for those of us who work with people who live outside and have been exposed with the weather and everything, it's even more intense. So, but I'm from the East Coast originally, so I'm a very straight talker, and I'll look you in the eye. But I started off as a doctor and an herbalist, and ended up as a social worker and a herbalist, and ended up as a doctor. And I live and work in San Francisco for the Department of Public Health. I oversee the homeless health policy, specifically now around COVID. I do street medicine. I take care of people that live on the street, and I'm an HIV specialist and addiction specialist, and I focus on women and families as well.
Yes.
And my biggest passion, as you know, Matt, is to support my colleagues and help them stay and heal themselves as they help support and heal others.
Awesome. So it's great to have you back. So when we were talking about this, and it's one of the things, I really do enjoy the process of writing books. And one of the things that I really enjoy is you have to think about things in a very deep, systematic sort of way. And when I was writing Connecting Paradigms, my trauma-informed motivational interviewing book, one of the things that really popped up about being very important, and it's always been something that's guided my thinking, but it really just became central to this question about how do we help people make change, or how do we make change in our own lives, is the stages of change. And I think a model that's been around maybe since the 70s at this point. So, just something that's always been in my consciousness, but really became a focus. And if you're not familiar with the stages of change, just to give you a brief overview, we know people start out pre-contemplation, where they're not really considering making a change. Then they move to contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and stable behavior. Relapse can find its way into the process at any point as well. And really, it's more of a cycle and not a linear process. I always like to say, people, if you've ever tried to do something like eat healthier, you can wake up in the morning and you have a lot of motivation. You might be in action stage, but have a stressful day and somebody brings donuts in and you pig out on 3 of those, all of a sudden you're back into contemplation. So with that brief introduction, Deb, what I want to talk to you about today is really the concept of that pre-contemplation to contemplation, because contemplation is a word that I've also thought a lot about as well, because it has in spiritual belief systems, Buddhist, Christian, all these, there's this contemplative, whether it's prayer, reflection, meditation to it. And I think sometimes when we're just thinking about stages of change, oh, you think about the change. But for somebody that might be thinking about leaving an abusive partner, stopping using substances, going from the streets into housing, which is always a tough transition for a lot of people to do. Contemplation, I think, from us in the helping profession is something we need to pay a lot more attention to, because I think sometimes it's like, oh, this is just a stage of change. But it allows us, I think, and motivational interviewing puts this forth, when we can be supportive and we can give time and space for someone to really think deeply in the midst of a safe, compassionate relationship, that's where change really happens. And so I'd love to get some of your thinking around this as well. I know we talk about mindfulness a lot. And just to kind of get some of your thinking, both from the practical perspective and also kind of what guides your work with patients as well.
Well, so I'm listening to you talking, and I think I'd love us to talk about contemplation from the perspective of the human that we're serving and from the person that's sitting with them. And I also need to acknowledge that I started, so I'm when I first started working in 87, 80, it's 88, 89, I was working around motivational interviewing. It's actually part of who and how I developed in my clinical work. And so I forget the world doesn't think this way. And I'm also very for someone who's so woo-woo, I'm very, very concrete focused. Yeah. And for me, working on a harm reductionist to someone, which is important to me, but to accept a human being where they are and to ensure that autonomy and agency is at the center of the work that I do. Motivational interviewing has been such a gift for me, because the fundamental core of it is it's giving a space for another human being to have their journey. So this is really tied in a lot to what you and I were talking about before, about spirituality and the hero's journey and how we're just supporting someone wherever they are. And just like we don't blame someone for having been abused, we don't blame someone for being, hit by a car. We don't blame someone for having gone through whatever they went through in their life. We don't blame someone for having curly red hair. Mm-hmm. How motivational interviewing is set up is to take away the blame and actually give us and help us within our societal views of how we think about people, good and bad, shouldn't use drugs or whatever. And it was really a huge part of addiction treatment, and to move from harm is to keep and maintain harm reduction. But it's really about all of the way that we heal as humans. And the other part about motivational interviewing is this concept of spirit. Now, I've never taken a formal motivational interviewing class or been trained to teach motivational interviewing, though I've been training and teaching about it for years. I've never done a formal certification. But the spirit is to hold space, like we were talking about in our last podcast about spirituality. How do you actually know who you are so that you can hold space in a non-judgmental way for another human? So those are those fundamental components around this cycle, this picture of pre-contemplation, contemplation, action, and all the other steps. So I fundamentally think about it a lot, and I watch and I teach and train addiction medicine fellows. And one of the most amazing fellows that worked with me last year came up to me and said, I just took motivational interviewing and it was great. And I learned all these great techniques and it's going to really change what I'm doing. But Deb, it doesn't make sense to me, because people are, you say all these things, but then people are still using. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow. And then I read and started reading everyone's notes and the notes that I have to review for the residents. And I realized they have so much pressure to be able to have the conversation of, this person will stop using. This person will make this change. This person will take their HIV meds. This person will go inside. This person will sign up for Medicaid. This person will do this thing that I have on my agenda or that they say is a goal. And then I was like, God, we've set this whole thing up to not respect the space of pre-contemplation, contemplation, because contemplation is really action around something. So we have contemplation, action, and that judges contemplation of not having something, not being a substance. But you just discussed a whole entire, Buddhism, everything is set around contemplation.
Yeah.
About who are we? What are we? And so I am someone who does things impulsively a lot and will jump and go forward without a foundation, right? And if you just build a treehouse on a stick without a good foundation, you're going to topple over.
Yeah.
So I really think about, from what this amazing fellow taught me, I designed like a lot of some training and other curriculum for the residents around this. That's why it's like spirituality, gratitude, who am I? How do I get to my own amygdala so I can sit in that space and not judge, right? Which is a huge part of it. And then thinking about what contemplation is for that individual, if they say they want a goal or if they say they don't want a goal. And how do we respect them and turn that truly into a concept in our brain of action? Does that make sense? Yeah. And then how do we, as preceptors, supervisors, clinicians, case managers, whoever we are, stop putting judgments on ourselves that we're actually not doing a good job if people don't do that behavior, if they don't stop using, if they don't get inside. And when we're judging ourselves, that leads to burnout. I have a caseload of 20 people and everyone's still outside. No one's going inside. I have a caseload of, I have 45 people. I take care of the people that the quote hardest to serve with HIV, not on meds, all these things, and they're not virally suppressed. Yeah. You know, is that a judgment? So how do we actually use it both for the human that we're serving, get space to actually truly and understand contemplation themselves, and also understanding it so that we're changing how we're looking at treatment in terms of health outcomes. So that's kind of the foundation of where I'm thinking about contemplation a lot, in action. And it's all, also the other thing I think about contemplation, the most important thing is whose goal is it? What are we talking about?
Yeah.
Even.
Right.
Contemplating what? So if the only thing that matters is someone takes an HIV pill or goes inside or signs up for their benefits or whatever, you know, my hair, I used to always want, going back to my hair, I always wanted straight black hair. So iron it out, do like this, wanted this thing. And at the end of the day, trauma is a journey. Recovery from trauma is a journey. It's going to look different. Recovery from addiction, being a human being is a journey, right? So where are you? This goes with your, I really thought a lot and listened to you again about talking about the hero's journey. It's a journey and it's going to go like this. So contemplation of what and how do you define it? So when going back to your concept of Buddhism, and I'd love you to ask you some questions too, when you think about what you're thinking about and how do you just respect where you are and hold the space. So when I say contemplation about what, if a human being is sitting in front of you or willing to talk to you, that is a huge win. And if we can say, and if in our SOAP notes or whatever our notes are, like engagement, communication, like outreach, those are things, because I teach and train outreach workers, right? Outreach is a thing. It's not just something to get you to another thing. Outreach is a thing. Yeah. Outreach is powerful. Outreach is the first thing to keep someone safe. Engagement is the first thing to keep someone safe. If we just, how much time that's taken us in all of our career, because when I started outreach workers, I mean, I was an outreach worker and that was nothing, right? Yeah. You're trying to get to something else. You're just the step in between. So this is something. So if we just changed our SOAP notes around, even if someone's in action stage, this is their pre-contemplation on remaining there, or this is their contemplation, this is where they're at. We want to support and respect where they're at right now. And they're willing to talk to me. You're willing to consider. You're willing to go into the temple. You're willing to stop for a minute and meditate. You're willing to actually not eat 2 cookies and just eat 1. Yeah. Like even thinking about it, like that needs to be honored, because what happens in our brain, and you know this very well, if you notice something, there'll be a change in your brain. So if I'm thinking even about my retina, and I'm looking at you, and if you think about what I see in your, so you have your fovea, which is where you get the actual information very clear, and then you have your peripheral thing. So there's rods and cones. In the periphery, you get information, right? You see things, but it's not really clear. Yeah. And if you put something in where your disc is in your fovea, you see it clearly. So, and then that sends different information into your optic nerve. So what you're actually doing at a person saying, I'll listen and think about this. I'll come and talk to you. I'll consider. that's putting something in a phobia. Why isn't that something that we're applauding? Why isn't that an action?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there and I'm going to turn it back to you, because setting the stage about how do we actually acknowledge contemplation as a thing that is important, I think is an important first step. What are your thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, again, when I started to really think a lot deeper around the stages is understanding that just because we see every reason for the person to stop using to go into housing program doesn't mean they've even spent a minute contemplating that. So I just, to me, to get to contemplation is even, a lot trickier than we, I think, give time for, energy to, or training on. Because again, and if we're trying to, I'm going to bring in a little bit of nerdy areas in here with the brain and the ventral vagal, but we have to be in a neurobiological state for contemplation, right? If we're in our amygdala, or we're in our sympathetic dorsal vagal, the fight, flight, freeze, if those areas are active, we're not ready for contemplation. One of the things I really am excited about HRV is that if we can measure where people's nervous systems are at, it can help guide, okay, is this person ready to jump into a more difficult conversation, or, confront their ambivalence, as we say in the BMI sort of world. So, just to know that, the person sitting across from you may not be capable right now of contemplation. We also know, that co-regulation, that we creating a safe, compassionate, that spirit of motivational interviewing, partnership with somebody, can help them regulate and get deeper into that. But so often, and you brought this up, is we want to jump to action, and our systems want us to jump to action. And MI tells us if we are the ones arguing for action, but they're in preparation, contemplation, or pre-contemplation, we actually create resistance. They're not resistant. We actually create that blockage to having those conversations. So this is where, Deb, for me, how do we support helping somebody psychologically, neurobiologically get into a state where they can deeply think about, reflect upon making some of these life changes that, again, as a worker, I may say there's 100 reasons you need to stop using drugs. But if I am not in a place too to really connect with you and understand, why do you use? What is your history of trauma playing into this? I don't just risk creating resistance because I become the one arguing for action, but I can also re-traumatize and, not maybe intentionally, but treat people in a way that could actually, cause harm and re-traumatization.
So Matt, this is such a great concept. I'm going to go back to vision again as a neurobiologist. And so we have these cells in our brain that are they call them grandmother cells in our occipital lobe, that are whole cells that are able to recognize a human being. And that it's developed over time. And it requires that you have an experience that enables you to develop this thing that's something that is safe, that your brain wants to take a whole cell and group of cells for, right?
Yeah.
So over time, you're able to develop that. But you don't have that grandmother cell. You don't recognize my grandmother.
Yeah.
Because your brain didn't develop that way. And we've all had experiences of, I never thought about that. And you're like, like those epiphanies, right? Yeah. And I also think about it in terms of like wound healing. If you are, and you cut your finger with a knife, right? And you're stopping your bleeding, and you're so panicked and you don't feel the pain, right?
Yep.
Because you're like, I don't know what's going on. It doesn't hurt yet. And then you're not thinking about, am I going to have a scar? How's this going to look? Am I going to have a scar? What's going on when you go to the hospital? They're not like, oh, let's talk about your wound healing. The first thing is, let me get that blood to stop, right? Yeah. And then you don't notice your pain. Because your sympathetic nervous system's going. We get the blood to start. Then you stop the blood, and then you stitch it, and then there's steps, right? But the doctor's not like judging themselves if that wound hasn't healed.
Right.
So both you as a human being are having this experience, and that you don't notice the pain, and then the pain happens, right? And the person that is taking care of you is not judging themselves because it hasn't healed already.
Right. Yeah.
So we're talking to people with incredible trauma, sympathetic nervous system. And when we slow them down, they feel pain.
Yeah.
So we're asking them, and even contemplating, from going to pre-contemplation where they're not having pain. I'm still a sympathetic. Yeah. When you get to the hospital, that's when your finger hurts, right?
Yeah.
So you're asking a human to step into pain because you're asking them to let go of their sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that.
No.
That's why I'm going and going and going and going. So having that understanding that from the human being side is that they're going through a normal physiological response. They're not able to get to their grandmother cell yet because it would cause too much pain to start that journey.
Yeah.
So the first thing is you need to give someone a pain medicine, right? And what is a pain medicine for someone with trauma? Hope.
Yeah.
Safety. No judgment. It's okay. You just cut your hand. It's not going to be healed right now. You know, you're not going to be like, I'm going to have to amputate your finger right now. Like, you're not going to go into the deep stuff, right?
Right.
So you're just appreciating that you just cut your finger. Let's do the most important thing. Stop the bleeding.
Right.
So understand. So the first thing is what you said. It is something. There's biological processes going on. The person might not understand Greek and you're speaking Greek. Yeah. And we've all had that experience of, and I've had many of them, like, why are you with that guy? Why are you dating that person? Oh, so like I just had my hip replaced and I walked around for 5 years with pain, and it didn't even occur to me that I could actually why would I go to the doctor? It's just another thing that you're going to plow through. So, and now I'm like, what was I thinking? So it's just how we have to appreciate how we're wired, and you offer in a gentle way. Well, maybe there's something else. Like, you can actually cook this differently. You don't have to stand here and watch it bleed. You can actually put your hand on it and stop the bleeding. If you want to, let me show you how it's done. Yeah. That's why things like modeling is really important, because people see what other people do. Like, sometimes you have no idea. Like, wow. Like I eating disorder. And so my mother's watching this. She's like, what? So, and I remember going to college and watching people eat. And I was like, how do they do that? Like, I was like, I had to watch other people model. So we as humans, taking care of ourselves, healing ourselves, having safe spaces, going out and doing outreach, going to people, bringing stuff to them so they don't have to come into our facilities or whatever it is, creating different methods to go from pre-contemplation to contemplation, creating safe spaces helps change that neurological content and your modeling. So modeling is really important. Demonstrating, offering information without judgment in a way that's actually palatable. So having peer outreaches, so an outreach person who's actually had lived experience. Like, I saw this person who lived on the street with me. Like, those are things that get past our defenses, lower. I think I've always said, like, sneaking in around our fight or flight response to the triple warmer and doing it. Now, one of the things that I'm also rocking on, so I'm going to talk about it. So that's from the person we're serving's perspective. From our perspective as humans that are serving them. I've really been reading a lot, and I want to talk to you about this, and maybe this is our next topic, about this. Someone introduced it to me as a feminist theory around the sympathetic or trauma response of fight, or freeze, but there's also fawn and fawning, and how many of us that have lived through trauma or been in abusive relationships or had a boss that was abusive, we act very deferent. I say sorry a lot. My kids are like, no more sorries. You're allowed 2 sorries a week, like no sorries. We act deferent in this trauma response to protect ourselves. And it's just as instinctual as fight, freeze, and fawn for many of us. So you're working with humans that have fight, freeze, and fawn response. Because even if you're normally, you have one of those, right? And we're asking them to do something. We have to be careful about what we're asking.
Yeah.
Because one of the slides that I always show the residents is a picture of a rat pressing the bar and being like, I don't know what this is, but every time I do it, they pay a lot of attention. These are humans that don't get a lot of positive regard. And the residents are always like, I don't understand. They said they were going to stop using it and they don't, because you're paying attention to them only around action. You're
Right.
not paying attention to them around pre-contemplation. And
Right.
they're going to have a fawn response. They're going to want you to give them some
Yes.
love and
Yes.
attention when you say, oh, you want to stop using? Oh, great. Not
Yeah.
like this. I have so much gratitude that you're sitting here with me. Thank you. Oh my God. You noticed that? Yeah. Or I just learned from you on that, or whatever we would do to our next door neighbor when we have, or to our cousins that we haven't seen for a while, or sitting down at Thanksgiving dinner. How do we have that gratitude, abundance feeling, neighborly feeling to a human that's maybe doing stuff that we have judgments for?
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop there. So in terms of the human and the contemplation, understanding that their brain might not get what we're saying. They've never been there. It actually hurts if they're going to come out of fairy and come into our world, because then they see that we're living in fairyland.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a physiological, painful thing that you're asking them to do, because change in your brain, that much change to get to cognitive dissonance hurts. If you do it too fast, it hurts. Yeah. And so cognitive dissonance, which I love talking about, is when you change too quickly. And I think about Woody Allen and Hannah, her sisters, when he's trying to figure out a religion, and he's like, he's getting out like all the different religions, and then he like has to do this thing so deeply and convert, and he becomes like the biggest Catholic, the best Catholic in the world. And because you can't change that quickly, so we have to understand that because then literally when you have cognitive dissonance, like when my brother died, I had such cognitive dissonance.
And can you define that for our audience? Because so
cognitive dissonance is when and you probably know better than I do. So it is when you've seen the world in a particular way, that you've lived in fairy, let's just say, and you're eating the big moon, and you're living in fairy world, and all the food is great, and then suddenly you realize that you're just eating mud. And you're like, holy moly, like your world changes in a minute. Or like there's an earthquake and I have no more home. Like, how do you can't like comprehend it. Yeah. Or there's COVID. I couldn't comprehend it. Or my brother died. Like, what? He's dead? Like I can't, like every time I'd go in my brain, there was like a gap. Like, what is this? Where's the info of my brother? I can't call him. So it's this, our brain literally has to change in a minute. And it causes, it's beyond trauma. It's like your brain, everything freezes. And when you try to get to that place, it's not there. And you can get physiological reaction. Like I was dizzy all the time. I was nauseous. And what people do when they're in cognitive dissonance, so let's just say someone who was, Woody Allen, he was Jewish and converted to Catholicism, or he had to be the best Catholic in the world. Yeah. Like it was like uber Catholic, because he couldn't deal with his conflicting nature of growing up Jewish and now being Catholic. Or I can't remember if this is the real story, but so dealing with change that abruptly is really hard for our brains. It can't get it. So pre-contemplation to contemplation, you're helping people feel safe, because you don't want to overwhelm them and give them a tsunami. You know that the pain's about to come as soon as they stop the bleeding and your sympathetic nervous system comes off. You don't want to judge them for where they're at, because they've made the best choices they could to get there. And you're grateful that they're even talking to you. Yeah. From the provider's perspective, because you understand biology, you understand human nature, you understand the concept of spirituality and emotional support. And then you're that person's supervisor, and you have 17 people on your caseload that are pre-contemplative. Yeah. And this goes with like your intake concept of like, we're intaking people too much. So Matt, what would a supervisor say to their case manager whose entire caseload is pre-contemplative? Like, to contemplative, do you know what I mean? Like, how do we acknowledge that? And because you're getting that, you understand that. Yeah.
Well, and I think that is where a lot of our systems set folks up to fail. If we don't appreciate the science behind behavioral change, then we push people to jump into a housing program there. And again, it's the outcome we want. We want people to become sober, right? And those are still good end goals. But I think realizing, which is where harm reduction and other things come in, I think in a big, powerful way of, if they've never thought about getting into a housing program, getting on HIV meds, quitting substance use, leaving an abusive partner, even though everybody in their life has always been abusive. Like you said, I think it's great. There's not necessarily a place in the brain to put a sober life in, right? To even contemplate, well, I'm leaving an abuser. The abusers, this is how men treat men, or men treat women, or women, it's just like our pre-contemplation is our normal, right? And we can look at this from a epigenetic perspective and neurobiology. So I kind of like to, there's a couple analogies I've kind of created with this to help break down simply, but like just thinking about living here in Colorado, sometimes we hike off trail and it's really slow and you get lost and there's bushes you have to climb. In other words, if nobody's ever walked down that path or you've never tried a behavior before, it is slow going. And that's where time for contemplation. And we can measure this with neuro connections in our brain, right? Mm-hmm. If you've used drugs for every day for the last 15 years, you have a super highway created where I may use drugs without contemplating anything about it. It's just part of my routine is to get high. And that just becomes part of my day. And so when we start to help people see different potential future, it's like, okay, they get the super highway for using, but there's this uncharted path for sobriety. And every time initially may just be thinking about it, talking about it, but we're starting to build a new trail and we're starting to build new neuro connections in the brain. Eventually they may have the confidence and self-efficacy to say, I'm going to have a day of sobriety. And that would not be something historically we've celebrated a lot, but we should, right? Because that is, hey, I'm in action stage. I may not be ready to say I'm never using again, but that one day of sobriety sends a few more travelers down that path. And maybe it becomes 2 days of sobriety to build that confidence up even further. So in one way, we're trying to deconstruct a superhighway of the old behavior. But I think what we don't realize is a lot of times we're also constructing a new highway, whether it's a way of thinking, a way of living, a behavior to support this whole new life. And that's why no matter how much I convince you why you should stop using, that's counterproductive, right? You've got to walk that trail. I can't hardwire your brain for that. So, it's just that ability to help.
I like that analogy. I love it.
Yeah, to help people say, you might be in contemplation with this person for months, and that's okay. And, I'll ask you this question, Deb. How many of your people that are, sleeping out on the street, chronic homelessness, how many only have one major behavioral change they're confronting?
Well, so first of all, I want to define self-efficacy because you mentioned that, and that's someone's ability and belief that they can actually change something in their world.
Absolutely.
And when I think about self-efficacy, it reminds me to reset what it is that we're talking about. So if you're saying that your goal is you want them to stop.
Yeah.
That's not that human's goal. So what do you start with? And that person sleeping on the street has self-efficacy around many things. I couldn't survive on the street. I love your story talking about that young man that was, made $1 million when he was selling drugs. And, I would not be successful in that world. Yeah. I don't have self-efficacy around survival on the street, but this other human being does.
Yeah.
So what you're saying the self-efficacy is on. So there's a reset. There's a reset on what are we talking about? So is it my goal or your goal?
Yeah.
If as the supervisor on that panel, that the first thing that I would say to that case manager is, what is that human's goal?
Right.
What's important to them? What are their strengths? What do they have self-efficacy with? What do they want for themselves now? What do they want for themselves in the future? And are they judging themselves for now? Are they going? I always say to people, if you're going to use use with pride. Because you know
Yeah.
what the killer is? Shame.
Yeah.
And I do not want to be the person bringing you shame.
Right.
So when we're doing outreach, if the only thing I have in mind is that you have to go inside and be housed, that you have to stop using and do what I say, that you have to wear blue pants because that's what I'm wearing today. You have to be a Starbelly Sneetch because that's the thing. If that's all we're doing, then we're just outreaching and bringing shame.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
the first thing with the self-efficacy is that is critical, because if you're alive, everyone has self-efficacy with something.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I first was working with women at Rikers, I'm like, if you could sell that TV that has nothing in it for crack, you can certainly sell that condom.
Right.
Like, hello, like,
Yeah.
what? You do these things really well. You
Yeah.
can do it. So, and I usually think I was so stubborn. I can definitely stop smoking.
Yeah.
Because I'm so stubborn, right? So, and I've stopped smoking. So, how do we? Well, remember I met you when I was oh, my mother's listening. My mother's listening. Okay, so I'm so humbled because I am a human, and I'm a human, and I don't mind talking about myself. And saying that, we can all, if you've set a goal. But there was a time when I remember going to see my acupuncturist. She's like, "How do cigarettes smell?" She's like, "How do cigarettes taste?" I'm like, "Delicious." And she like put the needle in, start hotter, and I'm like, I didn't want to quit. It was not, was not interesting to me. I'm gonna smoke again when I'm 84. It was not interesting to me. I loved cigarettes. And how I stopped smoking was I added things into my life. It didn't become about the stopping smoking, and it was not my agenda. I wanted to stop smoking because I wanted everyone to stop judging me for smoking.
Yeah.
So self-efficacy is the critical thing to understand and acknowledge, and to have a reset about what it is that we're talking about and what the goal is. So as an outreach worker or as a provider, the person's able to come in. What is it that's the action phase that you're trying to get someone to? And so that person on the trail, if they want to be off the trail, that is their choice. And you ask them, do you want to be off the trail, or do you want to be on the trail? You have to make a decision. Because if you're living in this gray matter, if you're going to use with pride, and I support you. If you don't want to use, let's figure out how to get there, and let me talk to you about the journey.
Yeah.
But like, make a decision. If you want to sleep outside and you're not ready to go inside, great.
Yeah.
Right now with COVID, we've taken like 2,000 people off the street that are high risk and brought them inside. And they were that minute. They were like, yes, I want to go inside. But most of the patients that I serve on the street, because I'm still working in the evenings, yes, mother, I'm okay. I'm not working too much. So I go do needle exchange in the evenings, and so many people sleeping in these shelter-in-place hotels are actually still sleeping outside.
Yeah.
It was just too much for them. Sounded like a good thing, but no, couldn't do it.
Right.
So, and that's okay. It's like, do whatever this is great. You thought about it for a minute. Awesome.
Yeah.
So there's a reset about what is it that we're talking about. Do you want to be off the trail or not? Let's just talk about where you are, and this is your reality. If you're going to do it and live on the street, let me help you do it safely. If you're going to use drugs, let me help you do it safely. If you're going to smoke, let me help you smoke that, whatever. So let me just celebrate what your choices are, and let's just call it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're living in Ferry. You want to live in Ferry? Go ahead.
Yeah.
So are you on the trail or are you not on the trail when you're pre-contemplative? And you don't want to scream in someone's face. Like, I remember one of my favorite stories from residency is my friend was doing an interview with a guy who's really hard of hearing, and she's doing the intake, and she's like, do you have any health problems? He's like, no, just low back pain. Anything else? No back pain. She's like, anything else? She's like, no. She's like, you're missing an eye. You don't have an eye. It was really loud. I'm like walking down the hall. What happened to your eye? He's like, oh yeah, my eye. Like, so, sometimes you have to just call it out. Sometimes it's not safe to call it out.
Right.
That's why peers are really important. That's why when I go out and do work, the folks I work with have so much trauma. I try to have their case manager or someone in the room with me to kind of be like, Deb, turn it down, dial it down. Don't go there. So acknowledging if you're on or off, understanding what someone's self-efficacy, talking about their strengths, understanding their goals, you being okay with that. And then as the supervisor, with the fellow, they were willing to talk to you about their substances, that's great.
Yeah.
And then we as supervisors, we as leaders, we as systems changers are saying that this is to be celebrated. There's action around pre-contemplation. There's action around contemplation that must be done. It's not that thing just to get our own fix of, I got this person off of drugs. No, you didn't do that.
Right.
So, and then the other day I had someone who came into the clinic who was someone who has a T cell count of 2, that our team has been trying to outreach for a really long time. And they got them in a shelter-in-place hotel, and they came into clinic. They hadn't seen a doctor in like 2 years because they were going to get a voucher. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, you're here. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And they're like, you have to get this person on HIV meds. They said they wanted to get on HIV meds. And that was like what I got signed out to me from the case managers. And I was like, wow. I was like, so what do you want? What do you want to make sure that we address before you walk out of here? Because that's the number one thing. So what do you want to talk about? Because that's really important to you. I want to get my voucher. Okay, then we have to get some blood work. So this is what the case managers talked to me about. They said, you might want to take HIV meds. And I could see their brain.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. So whenever I think about stuff, I think about the Price is Right.
Yeah.
And I always give people the Price is Right. And I give them door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. I give them data because my job is to give you data and you make choices. So that's what I said to them. I want you to leave feeling really good about the fact that you came here and everything is fine. I'm just so delighted that you're here. That was an action, right?
Yeah.
For me. And I said, door number 1, we can just keep you trying to engage with our team. You never need to see a doctor again and come to our clinic. We're fully mobile. You never have to do this again unless you'd like to, or we can get you to primary care, or whatever it is that you want. Yeah. And we'll just work on engagement. And I would love to give you a vitamin because I like to give everyone vitamins. Does that be okay? Would you take that? So that's part, okay. Because I always try to like get the idea of putting something in your body. And I give people grades. It's like, okay, if A is like the best immune system and like F is like your T cells are low, I'm like, you're like a D minus. And that's fine. If my daughter like didn't go to gym, it's like, I'll just fail because I don't want to go to gym online. Okay, your choice. Okay, so order door number 2. Let's just take medicine. Let's take Scepter so you don't have to get this PCP pneumonia or take the zithromycin because this MAC thing sucks. Let me tell you about what it is. That's door number 2. Or door number 3 is a full Monty. They're all choices. Yeah. If you can make one of these choices, the Price is Right. I'm so excited if you chose one of these doors. Which one do you want? And they chose door number 2. Yeah. I'm like, phenomenal. And I put gold star. So that in the pre-contemplation, contemplation, that you are creating some kind of action that a person is making a choice about, and that increased his self-efficacy, right? And let me just tell you, this person was dressed in the 9s. They looked phenomenal. I want them to take me shopping. Yeah. Just like looked fabulous. I knew, and this person survived on the street, was able to go in, engaged with new people. I know in my file of data on this person has high self-efficacy in certain areas, right? So those are the things that I do in the pre-contemplation, contemplation. What I train people about is how do you turn what they're saying they want and what you want into some kind of action that they can actually take. Like, do you want to come again? Can I come out and see you again? Yeah. Can it be next week? Or should it be tomorrow? Whatever. And then they're making a choice and you're starting to let them see that maybe there's something outside of fairy, that maybe walking on the path might be quicker if that's what they want. But if they're like, listen, I love just sitting in the woods, and if I go 2 inches, that's good for me. I'm like, your life, your journey, your goal, rock on. Yeah. So that's how I think about it with a human that you're serving, for the case manager, and then for the supervisor. And I always like to think about stuff like that, Matt, because we're never going to change the system if we don't take a human's truth and change it and put it into systems change, you know? Yeah. So let's back to you. I'm sure you have more questions.
Yeah, I'm going to share my.
Was that helpful?
Yeah, that is. Because I got to get your thoughts on one of my favorite visuals from motivational interviewing. And for those that are just listening, I'll try to verbally give a description of this. This is a kind of one of the things they've developed, Miller and Rolnick, with motivational interviewing. And it's a really simple graph. On the vertical lines, anxiety. On the horizontal line is life in line with values. And so what they found, and this brings cognitive dissonance back into it, is the more someone realizes, and again, here we go to contemplation big time, but realizes that their behaviors or how they're living life is out of line with the things they value or their personal values, the more that cognitive dissonance starts to manifest. And in motivational interviewing, what they've seen is even though cognitive dissonance is anxiety, it's a type of anxiety that helps us get to action. It's sort of the fuel for the actual eventual action that takes place. And so one of the things, Deb, with this that I wanted to ask you is, I don't think we do, especially in maybe the non-therapeutic, where we are more of a case manager outreach, kind of, we're a task-oriented sort of position, maybe even medical providers as well. Do we really find the time to get to know someone, build a relationship to the point where we can even learn what that horizontal axis is for that person? Do we find out what they value in life, what guides their actions, what's most important to them, what's their moral compass? Because to be in motivational interviewing, what they've learned through the research is that's the foundation for change. And yet so often I think we miss that in a pretty major way. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, do you have values conversations? Do you do that?
Oh my God. I think about this all the time. I didn't even know that you were going to talk. Can you go back to the slide?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that you were going to talk about this. I'm so excited. And the cognitive dissonance, I didn't know you were going to bring that up. So when I did clinical research, so this mobile medical care that we did was to gear to the hardest to serve people with HIV in the city. And I thought they were all going to be methamphetamine addicted, MS men who have sex with men who, they have to have substance use, mental health. I thought I knew what they looked like. And so it was the same kind of intensive model. We did the same intensive things. Mm-hmm. And in our outcomes, the people that didn't reach our outcomes, which were being housed, engaged in care, and virally suppressed.
Yeah.
We had incredible, 80% of the folks that we served were housed.
Awesome.
79% virally suppressed, even if they weren't housed.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. Were people who had a baby and lost custody of that child, or who once had been in the workforce. And this was a program designed to deal with these things: anxiety, life value, where you are on this, where to move things. So focusing on self-efficacy, all the things that we were talking about, and moving past. So if someone was unable to get to a clinic and they were pre-contemplated about getting there, but they were action phase with their taking Suboxone, we whatever they were action for, we did it. So we had each of the things that the person wanted, and we had different goals and where they were on their motivational interviewing stage, so they could take HIV meds without ever getting inside, right?
Yeah.
And we made it happen. We brought the pills to them. So I think about what was it and what was going on for these other folks. So, and it brings me back to the thing I always talk about, which is the difference between guilt and shame. Mm-hmm. And so, guilt is when we're have a goal for ourselves and we don't do it. I'm trying not to have dairy and wheat and sugar for a month. I don't know why, but I just thought that was a good idea. So nothing else to do with COVID. Might as well do this. So, and I ate a cookie last night. I felt a little guilty. Okay, whatever. My personal goal. Do I feel guilty? No, whatever.
Relapse happens.
Whatever. It's fine.
It's part of the change process.
Cookie. I enjoyed every minute of it so that I wasn't feeling, if I'm going to do it, I was going to do it with pride. It's fine.
Yes.
Shame is when society has beliefs about us, what society holds for us, what society is ingrained in me that is larger than myself, that impacts what I do. And I started reading about shame after my divorce, because I was like, society has that we have to be able to do everything, and I was reading a lot of that, the research from that amazing sociologist, I can't remember her name, after World War II, about, the Japanese culture with shame. And so if you've lost custody of your child, if you had a job and you lost it, if you grew up, I have this couple, that this woman grew up in Palo Alto in this fancy home, and the boyfriend grew up in a trailer park, and she has not even been able to get on Suboxone at all or do whatever, and they've been living outside. And she has this concept and image of herself that can't move her forward. And he's able to actually do all these other things because he has a different image of himself. I'm from the gutter. I might as well just go forward. But she's
Yeah.
just so stuck on this access here where her lifeline and values is on the so far to the right. And if I asked her to move, she would get so much cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
So even talking to me, oh my God, I sleep outside. Like, oh my God, oh my God, I can't believe on this thing. So you can get off this slide. So when I think about this, I'm asking her, she's like she can't get there because it's too much anxiety.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I was learned yesterday on that training program I was telling you about is that if you're terrified, don't do it. This person was teaching about like, how do we follow our intuition? If your intuition tells you to do something, first of all, the person said, destiny is going to happen no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So don't worry if you miss the boat. But if you want to follow your intuition and something happens and you're terrified, don't do it. If you're on the focus of on that graph, don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're terrified. If you're a little bit frightened or a little scared, that's a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of cognitive dissonance, a little bit of moving forward. Those of us who have I'm having a lot of anxiety. It survived teologically through my people because we're alive. We had hypervigilance. It serves something, right? Or I'm going to do this because I don't want to feel this anymore. Or I don't. If there's reincarnation, I don't want to go through this life again. Like, I don't want to do this thing again. So whatever it is that motivates you, what your self-efficacy is, can we actually apply it? And so I think about that graph all the time because I see it, living it, and I've been blown away by this data, right?
Hey, can I throw something in here that I
does
think,
that make sense? So my study.
Yeah, I just want to throw in and get your thoughts real quick, and I want you to keep going. But one of the things I've also really realized is when cognitive dissonance is a form of stress. Now, again, it's a stress that moves us towards action if we're supportive in that environment. But the other thing that, and this would really apply to your population too, is how, in the stress world, we call it allosteric load, or how much stress can you hold in your body before you go into flight, fight, or freeze, fawn response. And we can only hold so much stress. And I just think one of the mistakes I made a lot in my career is I wanted to get people to action quickly. And even if I had MI and I was doing MI right, I didn't necessarily take time to say, okay, how close are they to allosteric overload right now? And you think about somebody experiencing homelessness, man, is their life just a bundle of stress? Now, it does become their new normal and they become very resilient to that stress. But it's like, okay, how much, I have this analogy of, stress filling up your cup. And if it overflows, you go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. Is how much stress is in your cup today? And I actually like to have people ask that question of their patients or their clients. I like, especially around this stuff, let's just ask the question, train them on the analogy. Because if they say their cup's full, I probably don't want to talk about substance abuse. I don't want to, I know they're probably neurobiologically also maybe not in a place right now to do that deep contemplative work because the guilt, any shame, any cognitive dissonance is going to overflow an already full cup, which is where things like mindfulness, co-regulation, that supportive conversation kind of plays in as well. So when you were talking about that, it just resonated with, our folks are dealing with so much stress and trauma already. Trying to be supportive and be strategic around these stress-inducing conversations is so key.
So I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about someone's darkest night and their bottom of their abyss.
Yeah.
And the dark night. I'd like to talk about the person that I had said the door number 1, 2, and 3, and then I want to talk about another patient. So the gentleman, the person that I was did the door number 1, 2, 3, haven't been in before. I asked him, so what do you want to talk about? How stressed are you? I don't use a glass analogy, but he was like, I got to go. I only have a little bit amount of time, and I'm just. Yeah. And when his glass was full, which he had that, and sometimes people can take it like, how much can we talk about? How deep can we go? Whatever. I might say something funny. Can we talk about shoes? Or are we going to be able to talk about your, what are we going to talk about? So and I'll say, so I'll do a different kind of analogy, because I do that check-in, that kind of barometer is just a vital sign for me.
Yeah.
So the vital signs that I have are what are important to you. And the other vital sign is how deep can we go and where are you at today?
Yeah.
And those are vital signs. So their vital sign, they were full. They're like, I can only deal with this much. I gotta go. I got these things to do. I gotta go. And as I changed my perspective and started to put the autonomy back on them, and made them realize that I wasn't going to be the typical doctor, I actually did some energy medicine stuff. I gave them some crystals. They were they were hearing voices inside because they'd never been inside before. And I do a lot of stuff for people, my woo-woo stuff when they're inside. I talked about that. I said, when you're inside, are you hearing voices? Yeah. Do you hear them outside? No. This is something you can do when you're in that kind of space. So, and I started addressing things that were real to them. They kind of chilled down. They realized I wasn't going to do a lot of blame and shame stuff to them. And it lowered some of the glass. So sometimes that glass is full because you're sitting there with you and they know what you're going to do. Yeah. Right. And having been a patient myself, I know that I lose my brain and I don't know how to, it's stressful. Yeah. So I was able to help. They were able to actually lower their stress level to have those that get to that conversation during a month. So we can actually help them, even if someone's at a full cup, you can actually help them get down in that session. Let me help you lower your cup.
Yep.
So when you're in your darkest night, when you're in the bottom of your abyss, I didn't hit bottom yet. And I think about bottom in two ways. I think about the suicide threshold with depression, when you're so depressed, you can't kill yourself, you can't do anything. And then when you're starting to get better, that's when there's danger, right? Yeah. But then there's also that abyss. There's our darkest night. When my brother died, it was a very dark night for me. I just couldn't, I had just so much cognitive dissonance. How could I go on? And we make a change out of those dark nights. It's part of the shamanic journey. If we can find within ourselves something, and that's often what people have to hit in order to change.
Yeah.
For some people.
Yeah.
Right? For some people's, like when me quitting smoking, I just added stuff, right? So I have different things in my life that have changed, depending, right? And sometimes the darkest night has to happen in our journey, and you need to recognize. And I ask people, is this your bottom yet? Because that's some of the language they know. So I ask people how they like to change. Do you need to have like a big tsunami hit you before anything goes on? Or do you like to not? I'll give them examples. I quit smoking by adding things. I don't even know I quit smoking. I just wanted to know, I wanted to be gone, right? I want to get anesthetized and then cut the baby out. Or do you want to go through the process? So I ask people what they like. So that's really important, Matt, with what you're saying with the darkest night. So the other thing that's been a huge eye-opener for me is how much I hurt people, almost kill people, when I ask them to do something that they're not ready to do. Mm-hmm. And HIV pills are great because they're this concrete thing, right? So this UCSF 486 has all these patients they're amazing. They're the best HIV center in the country, with some of the most amazing doctors, and everyone has to get on HIV meds. And I used to never take their patients because they're too high ends, right? You can get to clinic, you don't need me, right? So when we looked at those are the people that used to work or have lost custody of their children or were able to get to clinic because they knew they had to, but they were the ones the hardest to get on HIV meds because they had so much shame. Yeah. And they had a lot of fun, right? Yes, of course I want to take pills. Of course I want to take pills. Of course I want to do this. And there's this one gentleman I love dearly. And the amount of times when I think about your scale, the amount of time, and we left him too quickly because he achieved a goal and we left, and I realized he needed support longer than others. Yeah. He used to work. He was very successful. He actually volunteered some of the HIV programs, and even getting him inside we offered him a room. It took us almost 3 weeks for Sayotha to get his stuff. We literally had to get him and carry the stuff in there ourselves. He just couldn't do it. And he was saying he's taking pills and pills and pills. And I found this whole suitcase full of pills. And I realized that every time I was asking him to take pills, like the rat in the bar pressing something, I was just reinforcing shame for him. Yeah. And I was like, I cannot believe I've done this to you. Mm. And you know what happened to him every time he had to take a pill? He would throw up. Yeah. And I have women that have that. Why can't you take pills? I throw up because they have HIV. The pill is causing cognitive dissonance.
Such a load.
It's just,
So many
it's
people.
giving them, it's not the medicine that's making them sick. It's the process of making them sick.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like, how do I like mash it up and put it in like oatmeal, like my kids, and serve them meds? Like, how can I help them take it without having to go that shame? It was like this huge divide, because where they were on the scale was so, like, there were all these women and these men that lost their kids. Their shame about themselves, that they had HIV, that they were homeless, that they lost their kids, that they weren't working, was so great, and that the HIV pill on your slide was just reinforcing what was happening, and they literally would throw up. So, which is part of cognitive dissonance, because it's a biological thing. It happens in your brain, and you get dizzy, and it's like being on a literally in your brain, it's like being on a boat.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens in your cochlea, everything, it gets triggered with this dissonance. So understanding what you're asking, Matt, is the money.
Yeah.
And we will hurt people. I hurt him by having my agenda. Like my friend Scott, who passed away, right? That we went to Washington with.
Yeah.
He and his hero, he was one of those folks.
Yeah.
That my agenda for him and what I knew he could be and what he was, he still had so much cognitive dissonance, and respecting that and holding space for that is so important. And I'm just humbled by how wrong I've gotten it, but I'm so grateful that I understand it. This was not prepared to make myself cry.
Doesn't surprise me, the passion you have for your work, my friend. Hey, love it. So
COVID doesn't get me, but this does.
Yeah, I want to ask you one more question related to this, because I think you bring up a great point, and we're not trying, we're acting in the most like caring, loving intent, right? I mean, I think that's what's so hard about our field is, I want you to take the HIV med because I love you and I don't want you to die, right? You know, I want you to get housed because I know you're
Scott, I want you to work because you're so amazing and you help me do these things. And
exactly. You know, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot of, because, you know, I'm always trying to find efficiencies in our work that improve quality. And one of the things that I think we missed the boat on, and I've been challenging people, whether it's, I call it trauma literacy, where you can talk to your folks about trauma, maybe run some psychoeducational groups. But one of the things I really, Deb, have been thinking a lot about is, how do we train our patients, clients on the stages of change? Because one of the things I think that we do, knowing that probably, again, within the course of a half-hour conversation, we might be speaking about 3 to 5 major life changes people are facing. It's usually, you know, sometimes it might be just one, but I mean, our folks are facing numerous changes that are probably harder than any one thing I've ever had to deal with in my life. Is to say, hey, you know, I know last time we talked, you were in preparation stage. I just wanted to see where you were at today. How are you feeling about this? Because, you know, we run the risk, again, if we're in the wrong communicating action, but they're in preparation, or they've moved back from preparation to contemplation or wherever it might be. Like, I've really started to think about, let's do a 5-minute training. I mean, you don't have to go into the detail like we do around just one of the stages, but, you know, it kind of takes about 5 minutes to give a brief explanation, so that the individual also understands, hey, if I don't change today, that's normal. Right? Because I think they get the pressure of something's wrong with me because I haven't done this yet. And so I just wonder if you've ever trained, talked to your patients about this.
Yeah,
I challenge people, print off the stages of change and just having your notes where they go last time.
So I think about this all the time, because everything I do as a clinician, as a supervisor, as a program person, as a policy person, is about education.
Yeah.
So information, education, knowledge data is power.
Yeah.
And so the more information, knowledge, data that we can give everyone, and the clarity, transparency gives them power, right? And that goes in all directions. So So it's just as important for me when I talk to a policy person for them to hear the voices of the people that we're serving and living experience. So I think about this all the time. I don't necessarily use the words. I mean, I can get pretty esoteric like you are. There's a reason why we're good friends. I could get, talk about the, hepatocyte and all the different molecule parts in it forever. It gets me very excited. It's a liver cell. So I do talk about it. And I think going from your pre-contemplation to contemplation, I thought we were going to be doing contemplation to action, but this is really, a lot of this conversation is pre-contemplation to contemplation. Is to just acknowledge. So I usually talk about what's important to you, where do you want to be, and what are your goals? And so that's like getting an understanding of what's important. And I will say, well, this is what I'd like you to do. Yeah. This is what I see.
That shared
and it depends on where they are. Like with that person that came to visit, that came to the clinic, the Price is Right person, I was like, well, this is what I would like to talk about. This is what I see. And one of the things I always say to people when I go out to the street, into a tent, into an encampment, is like, why did you come here? Well, because you're amazing and you deserve to be healthy.
Yeah.
And so that's my action. I'm telling them that this is the thing, right? This is what I want. I also acknowledge the transparency of hope can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I know personally, when I went to go see Leslie, our friend our mutual friend, and that after my brother died, and she said to me, hope can be too shiny. And if I could hold your hope, it would be my privilege.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most powerful statements. And as a therapist, when I was a therapist then, and with a lot of people, and especially folks that are really high, that particular cohort of lost custody of their kid, had worked before, has a lot of judgment, a lot of stigma, a lot of shame. I always make sure that's part of the conversation. And I literally say, hope could be too shiny. And they'll usually start crying. Right. So, that someone has acknowledged this is too big. I say, and I will hold it. And I have a Buddha right here next to me from a woman that I said this to on the street. She'd lost custody of 3 kids. She was diagnosed with HIV. Our team went out to go tell her. She had gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia, everything. And I literally said that to her. Hope can be too shiny. And whatever you want today, I just want to help treat you with this thing. And if you let us, and she wouldn't let us, at first it took us like weeks to kind of find her. She was running away from us. It would just be my privilege to hold your hope. Yeah. And she gave me that Buddha, and she's undetectable, and she's got to get housed. And she's like, this was this thing. So I want you to have this Buddha necklace up. But, the reason why I tell you about what she gave to me is because it is my gift. I mean, I'm the one that's winning. It's like I'm the one that's getting healed, and the privilege of being able to do this, and taking that perspective and understanding the stages of change, because that's the spirit, right? The spirit of, so the first thing you start is with the spirit. You set the stage for the person. I was like, I'm here for you. It is your life. My job, and I literally said this to the Price is Right person, my job is to give you data information. Your job is to decide what you want. And let me know how I'm communicating. I set the stage. So I always set a stage. And that's the spirit, right? We have boundaries about what we're going to be. This is your world, your life. I'm here to serve you. You deserve it. I have hope for you, and whatever you want for yourself, you see today, in the life of the future, I do that. So I always set that. I always get an idea of where they are. These are the things we can offer you today. Are you interested? Yeah. This is where our program helps people get housed. We do this, we do that. These are the things. Are you interested in any of those things? And so I'll go through the different, whatever. Do you want food? Do you want to eat today? Do you want whatever? Get away. Well, can I come back and talk to you tomorrow? I don't want to talk to you. Can I come back next week? Yeah, maybe. Okay, good. Yeah. So I don't say the words, this is pre-contemplation, whatever. I definitely have that as my framework. And it's very interesting. I always, when fellows or residents or medical students watch me with patients, I say, did you notice the motivational interviewing and the stages of change? I ask them to pull it out, because I don't say it. Yeah. And they're like, yes. I was like, well, let's talk about it. What stage were they in? So I think it's a very esoteric thing, but I think we have to, as supervisors, as clinicians, always go back to that. I mean, I'm very, like I said, concrete and linear. I want you to understand the mechanism of the intervention that you're doing. Yeah. What were you trying to get to? Was it pre-contemplation, contemplation, action? Where were you? Did you hold the spirit? And I teach it to people by saying, well, right now, this is where you are. Yeah. You're thinking about it. And you say, someday you might want to stop using. So let's just acknowledge that you're kind of in this gray area. And when you're in this gray area, which is a fine area, I want you to use with pride. I want the focus of this, the focus for you, if I offer this to you, I try not to say I want. Learn that from my kids. So what would be a wonderful thing that I would offer to you is just acknowledge that you're off the path. That's fine. I love you and I'll come back, and there you go. So I don't necessarily use it, and I would love to hear from other clinicians, because it can get really esoteric. But I definitely define what I'm doing with people. And pre-contemplation is such an important place. Let's just step back from our contemplation, that let's celebrate with gratitude that the person's even willing to look to talk to you for a minute. Woo! You came into clinic. Woo! What do you want today? Woo! Because don't. So my kids used to always say, don't yuck my yike or whatever. Like, you came in, and just because you want to leave shooting up, and you came in shooting up heroin, and you're leaving shooting up heroin or fentanyl, doesn't mean there's not a win. You came in. Right. So I don't know. That was longer than you expected, but because it always is. But I definitely think that we need to, as clinicians, have those stages in our mind. We need to know that there's action for ourselves in the pre-contemplation, contemplation, even though it's not called action. Yeah. We need to call it out. We need to be transparent about what you're talking about with the person. Well, this is your goal. What I see for you, what I know you can do, what I've seen from other people, this case manager that's with me right now, they were in your position. Do you want to talk to them? Yeah. Because they know. So the modeling thing or whatever, so I use those skills that you have with a pre-contemplation. I call it out. And then I also acknowledge that cognitive dissonance part, that when you're on that, when you're up there with a high cognitive dissonance, high anxiety, hope can feel way too shiny. Yeah. Does that answer your question? So I don't have a sheet. So I'm going to think about it, though. I think I'd be interested to see. Yeah, I just see it. I think sometimes we have these complex. I don't think stage of change is complex, but we have this all. I know. I just kind of. I wonder if we lose because for them to understand themselves too. I think sometimes when we're the ones that always hold these models in our head, I do. But everyone. So then, Matt, this is maybe this is an offline conversation. But, people learn differently, and I usually try to draw pictures for patients. You see me drawing pictures for the people I'm serving for teaching or whatever. So I definitely think a picture is important. Yeah. Some people learn from a picture. Some people learn from moving, and some people learn from storytelling. So I think I do think that we do need to expand it, because I call it out verbally. I might draw a picture for people. So I draw it out for them often. And I have a notebook even in the encampments. I'm like, here you are, here, there. Yeah. But if we could actually I see like 3 circles and saying, here you are, here. What does this look like? What is future state? Yeah. Present, mid, future. What does it look like for you? Let's draw it out. Here you are. There you go. Yeah. I think that this is our next thing. Let's do it. Yeah. Because I think my thinking around it is, part of it's for the individual to understand themselves, but MI just paid so much attention in their last edition to, if we are communicating in a different stage than they're in, that's where resistance comes up. And the tricky thing is, it's not a linear process. So they could have been in preparation. A week later, they're back in contemplation. So it's like, okay, if we have to be very efficient with our why don't we just ask them where they're at, so we don't jump ahead, create that shared language. It's been a question that's been in the front of my brain for quite a while. So I appreciate you. It's interesting. We had a form that we used for this research that was the different stages of change, or where are you? Yeah. And the pain scale or other kinds of scales, or where are you right now? And I think always, first of all, it's a courtesy. Is it okay? Are you still wanting to take the pills? Because I noticed that they're not that. Is this still what you want to do? And I feel like that's in clinical courtesy that we should be doing. Yeah. And acknowledging. So that I appreciate. But I do think having written tools. I love leaving people with homework or a written sheet or something. And so creating those that make sense. And I do think about it as not the 5 or 6 circles around, but I do think I think of it linear for someone when it's just there, like, here's where you are, here's where you kind of want to be, and this is, so
Yeah.
And I think that we could create a tool that would be good. Let's do it.
Cool. Well, I'll have to have you back to talk about that tool.
Was this where you wanted to get to? I mean,
absolutely, Deb. This has been a great discussion. So I appreciate your time again.
I laughed. I cried.
You did. We got the whole range of emotions.
I'm embarrassed. Can I just say I'm a little embarrassed?
Oh, your mom will love it.
Note to self: never tell your mother what you.
Yeah. So if anybody's interested, I'll put some information about my good friend Deb in the show notes at traumainformedlens.org. And Deb, I hope to see you back again in a few weeks, my friend. These discussions are so much fun. So thank you.
I learned a lot from you, Matt. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Okay.